I'm going to bring on our stage around Millennials. First of all, can I please bring on Harris from Cordoba Capital? Cordoba, apologies for the pronunciation. Right, we're in an elevator. Just tell me a little bit about yourself and your company and why we should appreciate you.
I have two hats. One is that I'm chairman of something called the UK Islamic Fintech panel, and the other is that I run an Islamic finance, corporate finance consultancy firm. My background is in investment banking, obviously quite culturally very different from fintech. And the purpose of the UK Islamic Fintech panel is to reboost London as a center for Islamic finance in the world, as it has been for many years. But I think fintech is the disruptive force that Islamic finance needs to be successful, and I think millennials are key to that.
Brilliant, excellent. Speaking of millennials, could I please also bring on Ollie from Loot? Ollie, hello. What is Loot and why should we care about it?
Hey everyone, so my name's Ollie, I'm the CEO and founder of Loot. We are a digital current account for 18 to 25-year-olds to help them answer the really basic questions about their money. So how much can they spend, how much can they save, is their spending normal? We've been live for around a year now. We've got over 100,000 people using us all the time, regularly. And the stat I'm most proud of is our customer satisfaction score has averaged at 91% over the last 3 months, which I think is the highest I've seen anyway.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Well, could I please also bring out our third panelist, Samina from Samak Ethical Finance? Samina? What is Samak Ethical Finance and why are you focused on it?
I'm former Merrill Lynch. I used to work in investment banking for a few years. I decided in around 2008, when the credit crisis kind of shot off, that it was now time to start focusing on Islamic finance advisory. So we're based in London. We're an international firm. I'm also the founder of the world's first Women in Islamic and Ethical Finance Forum. I think we'll speak a bit about that a bit later.
Cool. And last but not least, can I please bring out Stella from DCAP? Stella, DCAP, what is it?
DCAP started life in 1998. Like Harris, I was an investment banker, but I'm an ancient child of the 60s, and before FinTech, we all had to find something to do. In 1998, I left the global investment bank that I worked for as a director in capital markets, set up my own business. As an intermediary in the Islamic financial services space, and over the past 20 years we have gone through a transition and we have created a fintech solution for Islamic banks and financial institutions that has a global footprint. That is called Ethos, and that's probably what will be the key point of interest about us.
Brilliant, excellent. Has everyone downloaded the app? All the people got the app? Well, hey, excellent. We've got a couple of polls that we're going to be doing throughout the session. First one, how much in percentage is the total UK population do millennials represent? And for this case, we're looking between 20 and 35-year-olds. Right, who put less than 10%? You're wrong. It's less than 30%. That's still about a third of the population. Not a market to be neglected. Guys, the first thing I want to sort of throw open to the panel is, do millennials care about ethics, or are they more focused on all the cliches like avocado toast? Harris, I'm going to open that to you for the opener.
Interestingly, when I used to work at one of the British Islamic banks, I put to the board that we should create. We did a lot of fund products, which are obviously Sharia compliant, so they have a lot of screening applied to those products. For example, the industries that the fund managers invested in couldn't be, arms manufacturing or gambling, etc. And when I put it to them, actually, the data suggests that millennials want not just the negative screening, not this industry and not that industry. They also want positive screening as well, what we call the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. And these principles are governed by what's called ESG, environmental, social, and governance policies. Now, if you put an overlay on top of these Sharia compliance filters, you've actually created something that's good and wholesome, not just permissible. and you've created a fund that has a positive social impact. The board, being a bank, of course, wanted nothing to do with this. As far as they're concerned, it's just too complicated. It's another layer of compliance on top of Sharia compliance, as well as the regulatory stuff that they have to deal with. So the data tells me, yes, millennials want it, but unfortunately, the banks don't.
I can follow that. Ollie, with your 100,000 customers, mostly millennials, do you find that ethics and sustainability is something that they are very much focused on?
I think so, yeah. So our average customer is age 22. So we get kind of a good range of 18 to 25. But the average being 22 means we get to see their thoughts and feelings around banking. People in our customer base trust banks with their money, but not with much else. So when it comes to what you do with the deposits, we're starting to see questions around that. So people are starting to ask, what do you invest my money in? Is that representative of what I would invest my money in? And how are you making money behind the scenes? Where banks are normally pretty secretive about. But so we're noticing that as a forefront of what our users are asking.
Yes. Samina, obviously from your perspective, Ollie talked a little bit there around the transparency, but where do you think that millennials are? To what sort of extent do you think they do care about ethics and sustainability?
Well, research is definitely suggesting that millennials do care about ethics and sustainability. There was a research done in 2016 by Goldman Sachs called the Millennials Coming of Age. They claim that this is the largest generation in history that's about to move into its prime spending years. So millennials are opposed to reshape the economy. Their unique experiences will change the way we buy and sell, forcing companies to examine how we do business for decades to come. There was another research company called Nielsen, and they found that 73% of millennials surveyed are actually willing to pay for brands that are sustainable. Research is also suggesting that it's this generation which actually wants no part to play in human rights violations. They are more and more concerned about environmental issues. They actually care about climate change. The recent credit crisis has also, been so open to this generation. So the casino-style, banking culture was kind of very much in their face on social media. They were the ones that were exposing what was really going on. And I think they have a mistrust now of, I think the generations before, the elder generations, like my father's generation, they kind of still believed in traditional banking, whereas this generation is very critical and, their eyes are kind of wide open. And sort of given this, there's now various kind of fintech startup companies that have started to appeal to their social sort of, responsibility sort of side of things. So
I just want to bring in Stella actually there. You're waffling against me.
Sorry.
Right. Stella, in terms of obviously Islamic finance,
Yeah.
what kind of role does Sharia compliance can do when it comes to ethics and sustainability?
Okay. Well, it's interesting. For those who really don't follow Islamic finance, temporary financial system, only with about a 40-year lifespan at the moment. And we have built our industry predominantly from the emerging markets on a banking platform, faith-based principles, and an environment where economies' growth has been driven by sort of revenue from traditional fossil fuels. So there has been a bit of a disconnect between the implementation of our faith-based principles, which are just great, and also other drivers of sustainability, responsibility that might create a more holistic solution. And there's certainly nothing to say that that disconnect should be there. Harris touched a little bit on having a system that's been built on banks and banking perspectives. And there's a slight problem there, of course, because those banks are driven by profitability and shareholder requirements as well. But there is nothing, I think, that says that the two have to be mutually exclusive, and impact can be delivered in tandem with profitability as well. But what we have to do I think we realise in industry is link the two together. And Harris also mentioned PRI. Right now, there's quite a big work piece going on around industry to see how we can broaden our outreach and connect into other subsets of the broader SRI communities.
Excellent. Right, let's get another poll going. Audience, get your apps out. What percentage of UK millennials live in London? Or very close, very close. It's actually, the correct answer is between 15 and 20%. So, chap in the front very happy there. Right. So ethics and sustainability, they matter to millennials. But what I want to know from you guys is what extent. Because if I'm renting a room in London and a bank says to me, I am an evil bank, but if you switch to me, I will give you £2,000. A lot of people are going to jump at that and not really care about the ethics. And it is a very easy thing to focus on ethics, but then if it's a choice between ethics and maybe having a nicer place to live, where do you draw the line? So what I want to throw open to the panel, given financial restraints, do millennials really care about ethics? Like, truly, if they had the opportunity to actually go, do you know what, I'm going to go and look up and go with bank evil, but I'm going to be looked after. What do you reckon?
You want to go first?
Yeah.
No? Okay. I think that actually, when I look at my own industry, which is Islamic finance, we can look at it quite in broad terms as an alternative ethical system of finance. Let's put it that way, because a lot of non-Muslims and people of no particular faith bank with Islamic banks as well, because they like the alternative ethical system that it apparently espouses. But actually, when I talk to my friends and family who are predominantly Muslim, and I say, why don't you have a bank account with a Sharia-compliant bank? They'll say, well, I went to get a home mortgage product, for example, and I looked at the contract, and it looked like they just crossed the word out interest and written the word in profit, and they just charged me more money for it. So what's so ethical about that? And actually, I have a lot of sympathy with that. So the end customer is not seeing the benefits of an ethical system of financing. They are also driven by the money argument. But nevertheless, I think one of the reasons for that is because Islamic finance has failed to differentiate itself and has actually failed to appeal to a sort of, a higher understanding. They've not appealed emotionally to the customer. They can't just appeal on price, they must also appeal on the ethical aspects. And that hasn't happened. So going back to the example of putting this idea to the board, why don't we do this, an overlay on top of Sharia compliance to make it positive and wholesome, a really ethical system that works across all faiths and no faiths. I think the industry is lagging. It's a dinosaur. It's struggling to understand that that's really the future. So I think Islamic finance has a capability of doing that. There's a lot of overlap with sustainable finance, but it's not happening at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. We had an intern that was with us at Samak Consultants, and she had received an offer from Goldman Sachs, and then another organisation which is obviously relatively small compared to them, which I won't name. And she just looked at Goldman Sachs. She looked at comparisons, how many women become partners. She looked at lifestyle balance. And obviously, like, Goldman's will pay a really good, because graduate training scheme, you're on a really good sort of start. She actually went for the smaller company. And so when she came to me saying that, this is my decision, my obviously reaction was, you're insane, go and apologize. But she said to me that, and I take what you said about, the rent payments and everything, but from this one particular case, I realized that she put priority on, her well-being above. And I think the millennial generation are, that kind of generation that are placing ethics, morality above even their personal, and the research is suggesting that. So.
Ollie, you're basically an emoji for the millennials.
Great.
What's your take on that? I mean, as not with your loop hat on, but as a consumer, if you were offered to go with, say, a different bank, but you know that it's up to no good.
I think there's always this battle between rates and economics and social benefit. From anecdotal evidence, with millennials, they kind of weigh the social good slightly higher than other generations, so it matters more to them, but the price will still always win. I think the benefits now is you can kind of have both. So a great investment platform I've seen is called Abundance. I don't know if anyone's seen it here. And they basically help you fund like green energy projects. And that is a great example of how you can get a great return on an investment, but also know that the money is going to be spent on something that's quite good. So I think the fact that there are now things that let you do both are really positive.
On the, just to go on to the people side, Stella, so you've worked a lot with entrepreneurs. When it comes to actually sort of hiring people and when people decide where they want to work, what kind of role do you think that for the people coming into the workforce now that ethics does take there? Do they go for the money, or do they go for, do you know what, this is a company I can grow and make better?
This is really interesting in our industry space. I'm not a Muslim, so when I listen with interest to Harris's and Samina's more informed commentary. But I do know that initially, for example, when Islamic finance was starting out in the UK, there were certain exemptions that allowed Muslims, if they chose to access conventional financial services because there was not an alternative. But I've noticed very much in recent years a sway away from that, and millennials, younger people that I connect with, just look for an alternative, which is interesting and gives room for challenges. But in terms of workforce, one big disillusionment that we've had in the UK, I think, is that many young Muslims have gone through education, professional education, thinking that there is a role for them in the traditional Islamic financial services industry. That has not been the case, not just in the UK, but globally. The capacity is not there. As an industry, we call out for new talent, for new entrants, but it's not there. And I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, a lot of those individuals, and particularly here in the UK, are saying, okay, let's create our own business. Yeah. Let's look at another financial services environment. I don't want to be a banker. Hey, my own kids say to me, Mum, we don't want to be a banker. You've done that. We're going to do something completely different. And I think ethics is driving that to a major degree, particularly within the Muslim community here.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, it's not just ethics that's driving that. The millennials and those who are, they want to apply their faith to their career, to their job, to their investments. They're not getting that opportunity with the Islamic banks. The Islamic banks are hiring people in their own mold, which is, dinosaur bankers like me, unfortunately. So this means that they don't have an industry to enter. They want to enter that industry. They want to create, a brave new world which is sustainable and so on. But they don't have that opportunity, and that's why, as Stella says, they are creating their own industry. And we're getting approached by FinTechs on a regular basis to say, I've got this, great new app, or I'm setting up a digital challenger bank which is Sharia compliant. How can we do that? Can you help me? That's the industry that's being created right now. That's
really interesting you say that, because I've got all the if anyone has a question, do put it on the app. We've just had a couple come through, and one is there a new ground for a rethink of building societies and credit unions in this new ethical era, i.e. away from the big banks, not unlike, say, for example, in the US, there's God knows how many different banks, but is there room for that level of sort of competition? I wanted to get some of your guys' thoughts.
Can I just put one example? There's a company called Insure Halal, which is based on a mutual cooperative, a bit like a sort of farmers' mutual insurance policy, which is a community gets together and they mutually guarantee each other in case of a particular risk, like fire or flood or whatever. Now, this is all based on Sharia compliant principles, but also they're kind of universally ethical principles as well. So it means that money is being used in particular ways. It's not benefiting a small group of shareholders, it's benefiting everybody in the mutual cooperative. And that's a much more ethical product. That's one example of what's being done at the moment.
And is there a lot of transparency with that?
Yes, absolutely. It has a governance board, which is, in my view, superior to the governance board that a typical bank might have. So it has to follow the regulations that the regulatory authority sets, but it also has an ethics and Sharia compliance governance board as well.
Aside from obviously on the Sharia compliance side, do you guys think that millennials actually appreciate transparency, or is it something that they like the idea of, but they don't want to have to do the work themselves to see that? I'm going to throw that open to the panel there.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a level that the people that we've seen as users are so switched off to banking and financial products that it's kind of a bit of a surprise when you kind of talk to them as a human and actually give them a product that they can understand. So that that takes a bit of getting used to from our user base. And then they become way more interested in your products, what your plans are, what other things you're working on. So I think there's just not been enough choice up until the last, say, 5 years, that it's almost still a bit surprising when a financial services company talks to a consumer honestly, in a way that a normal person can understand.
Samina, can I get your take on in terms of the level of transparency?
I think, again, the credit crisis, because it's been so, within their kind of, especially because this is the generation of social media, so they were the one that were probably most vocal about what was happening within this industry. So I think that they probably care more about transparency than any other generation.
Okay. And to bring back, because you can't look at ethics and sustainability in the banking industry without looking at all the regulation around Sharia compliance. Stella, in terms of what you guys at DCAP are focused on, how do you make sure across the industry that not only are organizations being compliant, but people, particularly millennials, believe that transparency is what it says it is?
Well, it's interesting, actually. It's one of the things within Islamic finance that we should be quite good at, because we're very prescriptive. We've beaten ourselves up over the years saying our screens are detailed and so prescriptive that they're negative. But actually, I think global financial crisis showed us that they weren't negative at all. And that's one of the things that a lot of other ESG communities are quite keen on, because actually adoption of a lot of standards there is still a work in process and voluntary, and they like the fact that ours is clear-cut and transparent. Also, in terms of our processes, Harris mentioned that we have an additional layer of governance. We have a religious supervisory board that look at the transparency, that check what we do against faith-based principles. So we're not just working with regular auditors. Within our firm, because we have initiated a platform that was quite innovative, and to the reticent corners of a conservative market, some was saying automation means no transparency. So it took us 13 years to prove that actually it's a lot more transparent, and you can see exactly what's happening. And I think now, when our institutional clients are taking that to retail and to their millennials, because they have big millennial client bases, they are insisting on it, and they want that same look-through that our technology provides from the banks. So they want to engage directly.
Just talk a little bit more around Islamic finance and ethics. I used to work at a butcher's on a meat counter. Apologies to any vegans out there, and I know it is a millennial-based thing. All the meat was halal meat. Never marketed once as halal meat. It just happened to be halal meat. Do you think that there is an opportunity for any bank to deliver ethical, transparent products that are so ethical and transparent, they just happen to be Sharia compliant? And why has that not been done yet?
That is happening all the time, in fact. I mean, there are many products and services out there which don't necessarily have a religious stamp of approval, but do conform with the ethical principles of a given faith. We see that in many different products. There's so many countless examples of that. By the way, the halal meat thing is possibly lead us up a different path, because there's arguments that the halal meat chain has to be actually from the whole life cycle of the animal, and not just anyway, that's a different subject.
It was wait first, I think we're all right.
I think within the Islamic finance industry, it's interesting at the moment, because the discussion is now moving, how can we collaborate with the wider ethical market? I know, Stella, you're quite passionate about this. So, the SRI, the kind of the CSR, all these kinds of movements, because they're so close to our faith. And the other thing that's very interesting is the amount of non-Muslims that are actually interested in Islamic finance. So, like just for example, our Riyan Bank, I think 50-60% of their clients are actually non-Muslim. And they actually went and did a study and asked them, why are you interested in Islamic finance? And they said, well, it's the principles, and when I sleep at night, I want to make sure that my investments aren't harming the environment or aren't doing anything. And when I look at the prohibitions, well, actually this is in compliance with what I believe, and I might be an atheist or whatever. So.
I want to throw open another poll to the audience. We've got one final poll, just to test you guys. What percentage of UK millennials were born abroad? I think you've got it there on the app. Well, you guys have smashed it. Yep, between 30 and 20% born abroad. Cool, right, we've got about 5-ish minutes left, so we've got a bunch of questions, quite a fair few questions come through, actually. Don't you think the focus on millennials is misleading, and there's been a rise in awareness, desire for ESG in all generations? I want to throw that again open to the panel. Do you think that the focus on ethics and sustainability is across generations?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
Being at least 2 generations older than everybody else. Yeah, I do. I mean, the focus of this is millennials, obviously, and we're talking about it. And it is having a dramatic impact in Islamic finance. And I mentioned with my opening remarks that our banks and our financial services companies grew in a certain way from certain economies, but the change, the mindset now, has been driven by millennial appetite. But actually, from top down all the way through, it's about buying into that and believing in it. And we've set up our own industry bodies to connect out and to connect into PRI, and we have something called the RFI Foundation, Responsible Finance Foundation, that comes from the Islamic space, but actually there are quite a few old fossils like me, and they won't mind me calling them that, who have been very passionate about getting that in place so that we can expand the outreach. So I think the question is quite right, whoever asked that, but it's about individual perspective and about personal conviction.
Just to counter to that, I mean, you're quite right. Of course, there are people of all generations who are interested in ESG principles. But actually, I found a much greater proportion of millennials put that at much higher in their priority list. Whereas, Stella, you're the exception. I mean, we do not have all the board members of banks, and particularly Islamic banks as well, who are that focused on UNPRI. Some of them haven't even heard of this.
Yeah, I get that. I agree. I mean, why is our firm, which is fairly small, one of only 3 Islamic financial sector signatories to PRI?
Right.
But to an extent, that's about awareness, I think. And we've talked about Islamic finance and the growth of that globally being about awareness, because in some of the markets in the Western world that we want to export to, there isn't a great awareness, and there hasn't been that focus on financial inclusion. Fortunately, to a degree, our government shared it here and have tried to support the initiative. And for different reasons, that awareness of sustainable practice hasn't really permeated some of our core markets, but it's starting to now. If we look at Malaysia, for example, there's a big focus on SRI and impact, and combining that in the Islamic regulatory code. So it's SRI and Sharia, and the two aren't separated. That's a very interesting proposition, I think.
Sure, I've actually just had a question come through here, and I do want to bring this in because I do think why is the panel so focused on Islamic finance? Well, the answer is because, well,
3 of us work in Islamic finance.
3 people here work focused on Islamic finance, and the other one's Ollie.
Sorry, Ollie.
And basically want to explain how that is different to the status quo. I mean, I've got to throw that open actually to you guys because you know a lot more about Islamic finance than I do, but from my perspective, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I will make one statement, and that is in the Islamic economic model, it's all about the nature of money. Money is not a commodity to be traded. It's just a medium of exchange. That means you buy real goods and services with money. It measures value in other things. Unfortunately, we're in a global economy in which money is traded, bonds are traded, debts are traded at above or below their par value. So the nature of money has changed. And the point about Islamic banking was to bring it back to this idea of real assets and real economy. So there was a one-to-one relationship between the financial economy and the real economy. That actually hasn't happened, and it's not really the Islamic bank's fault. It's because they're subject to the same regulations that conventional banks are subject to, and therefore they kind of look and feel the same.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and no one's pushed the bullshit button, so well done. Right, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I do want to wrap this up with each of our panelists, which is just in about 30 seconds. Why does ethics matter to a millennial in about 30 seconds? What is the absolute core reason why they care about ethics and sustainability over, say, whether they can have a bigger apartment or whatever? I'm going to throw it to... Actually, let's throw it to Stella first, and then go along this way.
My own perspective is that they are the product of experience. They've seen what's happened in recent times, and this is the result of it.
I think it's really to do with the social media movement. I think that's exposed a lot of things to them, so they're more aware now and they want change.
Yeah, I would say it's choice, because I think if the rates were vastly different on consumer products, people would always go for price first. But I think you can get competitive products now that are ethical, and the rates are similar or better in some cases. So I think you now have the choice where you didn't when it was just traditional banking with traditional banks. You have the choice now to pick things that suit you as a consumer more.
I think that we are heading towards an even bigger financial crisis than 10 years ago.
Oh, good.
Tyrus is very optimistic.
No, I really do feel this.
We know
I think
Harris
we haven't.
very well. We need to come in with this before we end.
I don't think we've learned from the last one, and I really feel that we've just tinkered at the edges, and we want to introduce things like Tobin tax and Basel III and all these kind of things. But actually, that's not solving the fundamental problem, which is that our system is wrong. There's something wrong within it. And I think we must find an alternative. Call it Islamic, call it whatever you want to call it, but it's an alternative ethical system of financing that needs to treat money as a medium of exchange so that we've got real assets, real economy, real wealth creation, and real jobs being created. Otherwise, we are going to have a second financial crisis.
Brilliant. Excellent. Cool. And that's, well, not excellent. It's I hope you're wrong. Someone pushed the button. But I hope you're wrong. But cool. Well, there we are. That is the end of our session. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Can I have a big round of applause for our amazing panelists?